What if the person who vowed to protect you became the one who publicly tried to destroy you? What if the proof that clears your name exposes a secret your in-laws have hidden for years? And what if the baby they called a mistake was the only witness? Stay until the end, because the reason he filed for divorce on Christmas isn't what you expect. When I open my evidence folder, every face in the room goes pale. My name is Haley Dawson. I am a 30-year-old structural engineer who deals in load-bearing walls and stress fractures for a living. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment the foundation of my own life collapsed. It was Christmas Eve in Willow Creek, Pennsylvania. The snow was falling in thick, silent clumps that muffled the sound of my tires crunching up the long, winding driveway of my in-laws' house. I checked the dashboard clock. I was exactly 40 minutes early. Usually arriving early to the Dawson family estate was a mistake, because my mother-in-law Ellen would still be frantically arranging the terrifyingly perfect porcelain village on the mantel. But tonight I didn't care. I had driven 500 miles from Boston with a secret burning a hole in the pocket of my wool coat. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, the silence of the car pressing in on my ears. My hand drifted to my pocket, fingers brushing the crushed velvet of a small navy blue jewelry box. Inside, nestled where a pair of diamond earrings or a necklace might usually sit, were 3 plastic sticks, 3 positive pregnancy tests, after 2 years of failed treatments, endless negative results, and the kind of heartbreak that feels like a hollow ache in your bones. It had happened naturally, miraculously. I had conceived while away on the Lakefront Harbor Point Tower project in Boston. I had pictured this moment 1,000 times on the drive down. I would walk in, pull my husband Caleb aside, maybe under the mistletoe, or just in a quiet corner of the kitchen, and I would place the box in his hands. I would watch the confusion turn to realization, and then to the joy we had both stopped believing was possible. I grabbed the stack of wrapped gifts from the passenger seat, balancing them precariously against my chest, and stepped out into the biting cold. The air smelled of wood smoke and impending snow. I keyed the front door open quietly, balancing the gifts, and stepped into the foyer. The house was aggressively warm and smelled intensely of cinnamon brooms and roasting turkey. It was the smell of safety. It was the smell of family. I kicked off my boots, leaving them on the rubber mat, and moved in my socks across the hardwood floor. The television was on in the living room, the low drone of a football game providing background noise. But the voices were coming from the kitchen down the long hallway to my left. I was halfway down the hall, a smile already forming on my lips, when I heard my name. It was the tone. That stopped me. It was not affectionate. It was not even casual. It was a sound I had never heard come out of my husband's mouth in 5 years of marriage. It was a low, bitter sneer, dripping with a poison so potent it made my steps falter. I froze. Instinct, sharp and sudden, told me to flatten myself against the wall just outside the archway, where the light from the kitchen spilled onto the floorboards. She's obviously pregnant. "Mom," Caleb said. His voice was shaking, but not with excitement. It was shaking with rage. And let me be crystal clear about this. It is not mine. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the wrapped presents so hard, the paper crinkled under my fingers. The sound was loud in my own ears, but they didn't hear it. "Caleb, honey, are you sure?" Ellen's voice was trembling, hesitant. Haley has wanted this for so long. Maybe. Stop, Caleb snapped. The violence in that single word made me flinch. Do not defend her. I have the proof. I've been tracking the charges on the joint account. She thought I wasn't watching. 3 separate charges to the Harbor Women's Health Center in Boston. A prenatal ultrasound charge from 2 days ago. She's been sneaking around for weeks. My stomach dropped. A physical sensation like falling down an elevator shaft. He had seen the charges. Of course he had seen the charges. We shared everything. I had used the joint card because I had nothing to hide, because I was building a surprise, because I wanted him to see the financial history of our miracle when I explained it all to him. She's sleeping with her boss, Caleb continued, his voice gaining a terrifying, confident momentum. Ethan Whitaker, that slick architect she worships, she's been spending 12-hour days at that studio, late nights, weekend site visits, and now she's pregnant. I couldn't breathe. Ethan Whitaker was 60 years old. He was happily married to a yoga teacher named Lauren who sent me homemade granola. He treated me like the daughter he never had. The idea was so ludicrous, so vile, that I almost laughed out loud. But the laugh died in my throat as Caleb kept talking. I already spoke to Marcus this morning, Caleb said. The name of the family attorney hung in the air like smoke. Marcus says we have her dead to rights, Caleb told them. And I could hear the sound of him pacing, his footsteps heavy on the tile. The infidelity clause in the prenup is ironclad. If I prove she stepped out, she gets nothing. No alimony, no claim on the house, nothing. You filed, Richard. My father-in-law spoke for the first time. His voice was not shocked. It was grim, satisfied, the voice of a man closing a business deal. Good, you have to protect the family assets. Caleb, you did the right thing. I filed this morning, Caleb confirmed. The papers are already drawn up. Marcus arranged for a process server. He's going to be here at 7:30 this evening. I looked down at my watch. It was 6:50. Here, Ellen whispered. Caleb on Christmas Eve? In front of everyone? Especially in front of everyone, Caleb said, and the cruelty in his voice turned my blood to ice. If we do it privately, she'll spin it. She'll cry. She'll manipulate the story. I want her served when Nathan and Emily are here. I want the whole family to see her face when she realizes she can't lie her way out of this. I want her humiliated. Mom, it's the least she deserves for trying to pass off another man's bastard as a Dawson. The velvet box in my pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. It pressed against my ribs, a physical reminder of the truth that was currently being twisted into a weapon to destroy me. Every detail he cited was real. My exhaustion, the late nights working on the structural retrofit, the clinic appointments, but the narrative he had wrapped around them was a nightmare I did not recognize. I wanted to storm into that kitchen. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the pregnancy tests on the island and demand he look at the dating, demand he look at me. But I stopped. If I walked in there now, crying and screaming, I would look exactly like the hysterical, guilty woman he had already painted me to be. He had the home field advantage. He had his parents. He had a lawyer. He had a process server coming in 40 minutes to ambush me. If I walked in there now, I would lose. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But my mind, trained to analyze structural failures and collapse points, suddenly went cold and still. I needed to stabilize the structure before I could repair it. Or perhaps I needed to let it collapse so I could rebuild it on my own terms. My fingers moved on autopilot. I pulled my phone from my pocket, dimmed the screen, and typed a text message to Caleb. Flight delayed. I'll be about 45 minutes late. The snow is terrible coming out of the city. Start without me. Love you. I hit send. 3 seconds later, I heard his phone ding on the granite counter in the kitchen. Speak of the devil, Caleb muttered. I held my breath. She says she's delayed, Caleb said. And then he let out a short, disgusted snort that sounded like he was spitting something foul out of his mouth. Another lie. She's probably frantically deleting texts from her lover before she walks in the door. Let her take her time. The process server will be here waiting. Just act normal when she gets here, Richard instructed. Don't tip her off. I can't even look at her, Caleb said. That broke me. That was the structural failure, the beam snapping under the weight. I did not step into the kitchen. I did not announce my presence. I turned around, my socks sliding silently on the wood, and walked back toward the front door. I placed the stack of gifts I'd been carrying, the cashmere sweater for Ellen, the vintage whiskey for Richard, the watch for Caleb, on the entryway table. I shoved my feet back into my boots, not bothering to lace them fully. I opened the front door. The cold air hit my flushed face like a slap. I stepped out into the snow, leaving a fresh set of boot prints next to the ones I had made coming in. I got back into my car, my hands shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to get the key in the ignition. As I reversed down the driveway, leaving the warm, cinnamon-scented house, and the husband who was eagerly awaiting my public execution, one thought pounded in my head, louder than the engine, louder than the heartbreak. You think you've written the ending to this story, Caleb? You think you're the hero uncovering the villain? I touched the velvet box in my pocket one last time. You will not get to write this story alone. I turned onto the main road and drove into the dark. To understand how I ended up standing in the snow outside my in-laws' house, with my life in tatters, you have to go back 6 weeks. You have to go back to the wind-battered streets of Boston and the steel skeleton of the lakefront Harbor Point Tower. This was supposed to be my magnum opus, a massive seismic retrofit and restoration of a historic high-rise. A project with a budget of $40 million and the kind of technical complexity that makes structural engineers salivate. I had fought hard for the lead engineer role, and when I got it, I packed my bags for a 2-month residency in the city, convinced that this job was finally going to make me feel whole. At Everline Urban Studio, the boutique firm managing the design, I reported directly to Ethan Whitaker. If Caleb had ever bothered to meet Ethan or even look him up on LinkedIn, he would have seen a man who looked nothing like a homewrecker. Ethan was 62, with thinning gray hair, thick spectacles, and a voice that never rose above a library whisper. He treated me with the protective, slightly fussing demeanor of a favorite uncle. He was also obsessively, loudly in love with his wife, Lauren. Lauren was a yoga teacher who sent care packages of gluten-free muffins to the office and FaceTimed Ethan every day at lunch to show him their golden retriever. "Go home, Haley," Ethan would tell me, tapping his watch when the clock struck 7 in the evening. "The building has stood for 80 years. It'll stand for one more night. Lauren says you need to rest." I would laugh and pack up my bag, grateful for his kindness. But even with Ethan chasing me out of the office, the exhaustion was heavy. It felt different than the usual project fatigue. It sat in my marrow. By the second week, my body began to revolt in strange, terrifying ways. I walked into the break room one Tuesday morning, and the smell of the fresh pot of dark roast coffee, a smell I usually worshipped, hit me like a chemical weapon. I gagged, dropped my portfolio on the table, and rushed to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. I stared at myself in the mirror, pale and shaking, blaming the questionable sushi I'd eaten the night before. 2 days later, I found myself weeping in my temporary apartment because of a television commercial about a dog that got separated from its owner's luggage at the airport. I sat on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, wondering if I was having a nervous breakdown. The breaking point came during a site inspection. I was walking along a catwalk on the 14th floor, clipped in and secure, looking at a riveted joint that needed reinforcement. Suddenly, the world narrowed to a pinprick. The sounds of the jackhammers and the wind off the harbor faded into a high-pitched whine. My knees buckled. I grabbed the handrail, my knuckles turning white, and breathed through the wave of dizziness until the horizon stopped spinning. Stress, I told myself. It's just stress and 70-hour weeks. But then I checked my calendar app, and the realization hit me harder than a steel beam. I was late, not just a day or two late, but a full week. I did not let myself hope. I could not. We had spent 2 years on the fertility roller coaster, Clomid injections, timed intercourse, the monthly heartbreak of a single pink line. Our specialist back in Pennsylvania, Dr. Ellison, had looked us in the eye 6 months ago and gently suggested that natural conception was a statistical impossibility, less than a 1% chance, he had said. Still, I found myself walking to a pharmacy, 3 blocks from the office, terrified that someone would see me. I bought a box of tests, then, paranoid that the cashier was judging me, I walked another 4 blocks to a different drugstore and bought a different brand. Then a third. Back in my apartment, I lined them up on the bathroom counter. I waited the requisite 3 minutes, pacing the small bath mat, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Positive, positive, positive. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and stared at them until my vision blurred. I touched the little plastic windows, half expecting the lines to vanish under my fingertips. They stayed. We had done it, against every statistic, against the stress, against the odds. My body had done the one thing I thought it was broken for. The next morning, I called Harbor Women's Health Center. I did not use a fake name. I did not pay with cash. I gave them my insurance card and pulled out the joint credit card I shared with Caleb to pay the copay. Why would I hide it? It was our money. It was our baby. "You're about 8 weeks along," the doctor told me later that week, pointing to a tiny fluttering bean on the grainy black and white monitor. "Strong heartbeat. Everything looks perfectly healthy." 8 weeks. That meant conception had happened right before I left for Boston. I walked out of that clinic into the biting Boston wind, clutching the ultrasound photo inside my coat like it was a diamond. My thumb hovered over Caleb's contact on my phone. I wanted to call him. I wanted to scream it through the receiver. But then I stopped. I thought about the last 2 years, the tears, the clinical, unromantic nature of our sex life when we were trying. The way Caleb's face would fall every month when I told him not this time. I did not want to tell him over a grainy video call with a bad connection. I did not want this moment to be digital. I wanted to be in the same room. I wanted to put the tests and the ultrasound in a box, wrap it in velvet, and watch the realization wash over him. I wanted to hold him while we cried happy tears. I wanted to give him the best Christmas present of his life. I'll wait, I promised myself, just a few more weeks. It was a beautiful, romantic thought. It was also the mistake that would cost me everything. While I was in Boston, nursing my secret miracle, things back home were beginning to rot. Caleb was not doing well. He was managing the construction of a massive distribution center in Denver remotely, and the project was plagued with delays. Every time we spoke, he looked more tired, his eyes rimmed with dark circles. But it wasn't just work, it was the pressure of being a Dawson. Richard Dawson, my father-in-law, was a man who did not believe in good enough. He believed in dominance, and lately, Caleb was failing to dominate. The real blow came over Thanksgiving. I was stuck in Boston, working through the holiday. To meet a deadline, so Caleb had gone to his parents' house alone. When we spoke on the phone that night, Caleb's voice was flat, dead. "Nathan and Emily are pregnant," he said. My heart gave a sympathetic lurch. Nathan was Caleb's younger brother. He and Emily had been married for less than a year. It was the classic unfairness of the universe. They had probably not even been trying. "Oh, Caleb," I said softly. "I'm sorry. I know that's hard to hear." "Dad made a toast," Caleb continued, the bitterness seeping through the phone line. He said, "Thank God at least one of my boys is doing his duty and giving me a legacy. Caleb and Haley are too busy chasing skyscrapers and shipping warehouses to worry about family." I closed my eyes, feeling a surge of hatred for Richard. "He's a jerk, Caleb, you know that." "Maybe he's right," Caleb whispered. "Maybe we're broken." "We are not broken," I said, biting my tongue to keep from shouting. "We're pregnant. We won. I promise you, Caleb, things are going to change. Just wait until Christmas." "Yeah," he said. "Christmas." He sounded unconvinced, and as the weeks went on, the distance between us grew. I made the mistake of talking about my work. It was all I was doing, so it was all I had to share. I mentioned Ethan, constantly because I was with him constantly. "Ethan showed me this incredible cornice detail today," I would say. Or Ethan insisted I leave early because I looked pale. I did not hear what Caleb was hearing. I heard mentor. Caleb, alone in our empty house, stewing in his father's criticism and his own insecurity, heard replacement. "You spend a lot of time with this Ethan guy," Caleb said one night, his voice tight. "He's the project lead, Caleb. We're working, right?" "Working." I brushed it off. I thought he was just grumpy. I thought the surprise would fix it. I thought that once I placed that baby in his arms, all the insecurity, all the jealousy, all the feeling of being less than Nathan would evaporate. I did not know that while I was buying onesies and dreaming of nurseries, Caleb was looking at the credit card alerts on his phone. Harbor Women's Health Boston MA, $250. Harbor Women's Health Boston MA, $150. Walgreens Boston MA, $45. I did not know that he was sitting in his father's study with Richard pouring him scotch and whispering poison in his ear. I did not know that the silence on the other end of the phone wasn't just sadness. It was suspicion hardening into hatred. I was carrying the answer to all his prayers, and he was convincing himself I was carrying the ultimate betrayal. Every time I said, "I can't wait to see you," he heard, "I'm coming back to lie to you." Every time I said, "I have a surprise," he thought, she's going to ask for a divorce. So when I drove down that snowy highway toward Willow Creek, smiling at the thought of the future, I was not driving toward a celebration. I was driving straight into a trap that had been set 6 weeks ago, fueled by silence, insecurity, and a joint credit card statement that told the truth but told it in a language my husband had forgotten how to read. I did not drive home. Home was the first place they would look. And right now the house I shared with Caleb felt less like a sanctuary and more like a crime scene where the body of our marriage had not yet been found. Instead, I pulled my car into the cracked asphalt lot of the Pineview Motel, a rundown establishment just off the interstate that smelled of diesel fumes and desperation. I walked into the lobby, shaking so hard my teeth chattered, and slapped my personal credit card, not the joint one, on the counter. I asked for a room. I used my maiden name, Haley Dawson. It was the first time in 5 years I had introduced myself without the word Dawson attached to it, and the taste of it was bitter like aspirin. Room 112 was clean enough, though the carpet was a shade of brown that did not exist in nature, and the air conditioner rattled like a dying engine. I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring up at the water stains on the nicotine-stained ceiling. For 20 minutes I just shook, from the adrenaline, from the cold, from the realization that the man I had planned to grow old with had just tried to serve me divorce papers as a spectator sport for his family. Then the shaking stopped. It was replaced by something colder, something harder. I was a structural engineer. When a beam failed, I did not cry about the beam. I calculated the load. I assessed the damage. I determined if the integrity of the structure could be salvaged or if it needed to be condemned. I reached for my phone. My fingers hovered over Caleb's name, but I scrolled past it. I dialed Jenna Brooks instead. Jenna picked up on the second ring. She was an ER nurse who had seen people at their worst, and she had known both Caleb and me since our sophomore year of college. "Haley." Her voice was sharp, alert. "Where are you? I've been staring at my phone, waiting for you to call since 10 this morning." "10?" I asked, my voice sounding raspy and foreign to my own ears. "Because Caleb called me," Jenna said. "He was manic, Haley. He was ranting about proof and ultrasounds and asking me if you had ever slipped up and mentioned another guy. He asked if I knew anyone named Ethan." I closed my eyes. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to go to hell and that he was delusional," Jenna said flatly. "But Haley, it was weird. He didn't sound like himself. He sounded rehearsed, like he was reading from a script someone else wrote for him." "He mentioned Marcus Hollister," I said. "Yes," Jenna confirmed. "That's exactly who he mentioned. He kept saying Marcus says the timeline adds up. Marcus says the clinic charges are the smoking gun. Since when does Caleb take legal advice from his daddy's attack dog before talking to his wife?" "Since he decided to blindside me on Christmas Eve," I said. "Where are you?" "I'm safe," I said. "I'm at a motel. I can't go home, Jenna. I can't see him, not until I have ammunition." "You didn't cheat, Haley. I know that. You know that." "It doesn't matter what we know," I said, sitting up straighter. "It matters what they can prove, or what they think they can prove. They have a narrative, they have dates, they have charges. They're building a case to destroy me. So what are you going to do?" I looked at my bag in the corner. Inside was my project notebook, filled with sketches of load paths and tension cables for the Harbor Point Tower. I'm going to do what I do best, I said. I'm going to inspect the damage, and then I'm going to tear their argument down brick by brick. I hung up and pulled the notebook out of my bag. I flipped past the drawings of steel trusses and found a blank page. I took a pen and wrote a new header in bold block letters. Evidence I need before I ever step back in that house. I started writing. My hand moved fast, fueled by a clarity that felt almost dangerous. Item 1. Medical records. I needed the full file from Harbor Women's Health. Not just the ultrasound, but the blood work, the hormone levels. Dr. Warren had mentioned that my levels showed signs of prior fertility treatments, the lingering effects of the medication I had taken for 2 years. That was biological proof this was not a spontaneous fling pregnancy. This was a continuation of a long, hard battle. Item 2. Conception dating. The ultrasound said 8 weeks. I did the math in the margin of the notebook. 8 weeks ago was late September. I pulled up my calendar on my phone. Late September, the weekend of the 23rd. I had flown home from Boston that weekend. We had gone to a cabin in the Pocono Mountains for our anniversary. We had barely left the bed for 48 hours. I circled the date so hard, the pen tore through the paper. There is your window, Caleb. You were there. Item 3. Clinic billing codes. Caleb saw Harbor Women's Health and assumed abortion or STD checks or whatever nightmare scenario Richard had fed him. But insurance codes were specific. Code Z32-01, encounter for pregnancy test, positive. Code 009.9, supervision of high-risk pregnancy. The code would tell the truth even if he refused to listen to me. Item 4, witness statements. Ethan, Lauren, they would have to be involved. I hated that. I hated dragging my kind, elderly boss and his yoga teacher wife into the sewage of my marital drama. But I had no choice. I wrote down, get affidavit, get Ethan's travel logs, prove he was with Lauren every weekend I was supposedly sleeping with him. Then I paused. I looked at the list. It was solid. It was enough to clear my name in a court of law, but it wasn't enough to explain why this was happening. Jenna's words echoed in my head. He sounded rehearsed. He mentioned Marcus. Marcus Hollister was Richard's creature, a shark in a 3-piece suit who had drafted our prenup 5 years ago. I remembered sitting in his mahogany conference room, feeling small as he slid the document across the table, the infidelity clause. I wrote it down at the bottom of the page, underlining it twice. Check who benefits financially if I am found at fault. If we divorced amicably, or if Caleb filed without cause, I was entitled to half the equity in our house. I was entitled to a portion of his shares in Dawson Freight and Supply, the family business, because I had invested my own salary into the company during the lean years. But if I cheated, if I was found at fault for infidelity, I got 0. I walked away with my clothes and my car, and Caleb's shares, the ones that gave him a voting block against Richard, would likely revert to family control or be placed in a trust to protect them from me. My God, I whispered to the empty room. This wasn't just about a jealous husband. This was a hostile takeover. I started a second list, emotional evidence. I needed to prove the manipulation. I needed to show the timeline of Caleb's mental decline. I logged into our phone carrier's website using the password Caleb had never bothered to change. I downloaded the call logs for the last 3 months. I scanned the numbers. There it was. Richard's landline, every single day, sometimes twice a day. And then another number, a blocked ID, that appeared every Thursday evening for 45 minutes. Teletherapy or a lawyer? I wrote it down. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Harbor Women's Health. It was closed for the holiday, but they had an emergency line for patients. "This is the answering service," a woman said. "This is Haley Dawson," I said, my voice steady. "I am a patient of Dr. Warren. I have an urgent administrative request. I need my entire medical file prepared for pickup on the 26th of December, every page, every lab result. And I need a signed letter from Dr. Warren confirming the estimated date of conception based on fetal measurements. Ma'am, the office is closed until... My husband has accused me of infidelity and is filing for divorce based on a misinterpretation of your billing charges," I interrupted. "I need that file to prove this baby is his. Please mark it as urgent." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "I will put the message through to Dr. Warren's personal pager immediately, Ms. Dawson." "Thank you." I hung up and took a deep breath. Next came the hardest call. I dialed Ethan's cell. It went to voicemail. He was probably drinking eggnog with Lauren, completely unaware that his name was being dragged through the mud in a kitchen in Pennsylvania. "Ethan, it's Haley," I said to the voicemail. "I am so sorry to call you on Christmas Eve. Something catastrophic has happened. Caleb has filed for divorce. He has been led to believe that you and I are having an affair and that my pregnancy is yours." I paused, forcing myself not to apologize for existing. "I need to meet with you and Lauren in person as soon as I get back to the city. I need your help to kill this lie before it destroys my reputation and yours. Please call me." I ended the call and tossed the phone on the bed. I did not cry. I felt like crying, but I refused to waste the hydration. Instead, I opened the banking app on my phone. I navigated to the joint credit card statements. I took screenshots of the last 3 months. I zoomed in on the charges. Harbor Women's Health, Harbor Women's Health Target, prenatal vitamins. They looked so innocent on the screen, just black text on a white background. But Richard and Caleb had turned them into a smoking gun. I opened a photo editing app and selected the red marker tool. I circled each charge. I circled the dates. I circled the locations. I stared at the image until the lines burned into my retinas. "You are not secrets anymore," I whispered to the glowing screen. "You are evidence now." I lay back on the stiff motel pillows, the notebook on my chest, the phone in my hand. I was alone on Christmas Eve in a $59 motel room. My husband hated me. My in-laws were celebrating my destruction. But they had made one critical error. They assumed I would be too heartbroken to fight back. They assumed Haley the wife would crumble. They forgot about Haley the engineer, and I was just beginning to draft the blueprints for their ruin. The fluorescent lights of Harbor Women's Health hummed with a frequency that usually made me anxious, but today I felt nothing but cold, clinical determination. I sat across from Dr. Leah Warren, watching her face transition from professional politeness to undisguised horror as I explained why I needed my records. "He believes," I said, my voice steady, "that the conception date does not align with his presence. He believes I was having an affair with my 60-year-old boss in Boston." Dr. Warren, a woman who had held my hand through 3 failed intrauterine insemination cycles, took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Haley, that is not just insulting, it is medically illiterate." She turned to her computer and began typing furiously. the sound of the keys was the first drumbeat of my counterattack. "We are going to build a packet," she said, her tone sharp. "I'm printing the full ultrasound report. Based on the crown rump length of the fetus measured at your appointment, we can narrow the conception window with 95% accuracy." She spun the monitor around. "Look at this. The growth markers place conception between September 22nd and September 24th. I stared at the screen. September 23rd was our anniversary. We had been at the cabin in the Pocono Mountains. We had not left the property for 48 hours. "There is something else," Dr. Warren said, her finger tracing a line on a blood work report I had barely glanced at before. I didn't mention this earlier because it was not clinically relevant to the baby's health. But in a legal context, it is gold. Your progesterone levels, what about them? "They are naturally high, which is great," she explained. "But look at the trace markers here. Your blood work shows a specific hormonal pattern, consistent with the residual effects of the gonadotropins you were taking during your last fertility cycle 4 months ago. It is faint, but it is there." She looked me dead in the eye. "Haley, this pregnancy is not an accident. Biologically speaking, your body was primed for this by the treatments you and Caleb paid for. This is a continuation of your joint medical history. A fresh fling would not look like this on a blood panel." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Can you put that in writing?" "I will write a letter so detailed that his lawyer will need a medical degree to refute it," she promised. "I will sign it. I will notarize it. And I will attach a copy of the conception chart that puts you in Pennsylvania, not Boston, when this baby was made." 2 hours later, I walked out with a thick manila envelope. Step 1 was complete. Step 2 was harder. It required shame. I met Ethan and Lauren in the glass-walled conference room at Everline Urban Studio. The office was empty for the holiday break, the silence amplifying the awkwardness. Ethan looked pale, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by shock. Lauren, sitting next to him in a thick wool sweater, looked like she was ready to set something on fire. I laid it all out, the accusation, the timeline, the fact that Caleb had named Ethan specifically. I expected them to be embarrassed. I expected Ethan to worry about HR implications. I expected Lauren to look at me with even a sliver of suspicion. Instead, Lauren slammed her hand down on the table so hard her water bottle jumped. "The absolute coward," she hissed. "Lauren," Ethan said gently. "No, Ethan," she snapped, turning to me. "Haley, do not apologize. This is not your fault. This is a weak man trying to destroy a strong woman because he is insecure." She pulled a notebook out of her bag. "I have already started listing dates. Ethan is not a spy, Haley. He is a creature of habit. If he is not at work, he is with me." "I have my Google Calendar," Ethan said, sliding a stack of color-coded printouts across the table. "I had my assistant print the last 4 months. Look at the blue blocks. Those are your site meetings. See the attendees list. You and I were never alone. There was always a site foreman, a contractor, or a junior architect present, every single time." He flipped the page. "And here are my travel receipts. Every Friday night, I flew home to the suburbs. Every Monday morning, I flew back. Here are the Uber receipts from the airport to my house. Unless your husband thinks I have the ability to teleport between my living room and your apartment, his theory is physically impossible." Lauren grabbed a pen. "I am writing a letter," she announced. "I am going to state under penalty of perjury that my husband was present with me During the evenings and weekends in question, I am going to list the movies we watched, the dinners we cooked, and I am going to add a paragraph stating that if the Dawson family repeats this lie to one more person, I will personally sue them for defamation of character and contact the board of directors at your husband's company to file a formal harassment grievance. She looked at me, her eyes fierce. You are family to us, Haley. We do not let family get buried. I left the office with a second envelope and a feeling I had not experienced in days, hope. But hope was not enough. I needed a weapon. Jenna had given me the number of a private investigator named Mason Kerr. We met at a nondescript coffee shop in the Loop. Mason was a guy who blended in, average height, brown hair, wearing a gray hoodie that looked expensive but boring. He did not look like a detective. He looked like an IT guy. He listened to my story without blinking, taking notes on a tablet. When I finished, he took a sip of his black coffee and looked at me. I can get you the proof you need to clear your name, Mason said. That's the easy part, the receipts, the logs, the witnesses. You're already halfway there. But I have to ask you a question, Ms. Dawson. It's Dawson, I corrected him. Ms. Dawson. Ms. Dawson, he nodded. Do you want me to just prove you're innocent? Or do you want to know why your husband went nuclear on Christmas Eve? What do you mean? I mean, Mason said, leaning in slightly. Husbands get jealous, sure. But filing for divorce on a holiday with a process server on standby, getting a high-priced lawyer to draft papers before asking you a single question, that's not just jealousy. That's a strategy. Do you want me to find out who built the strategy? Yes, I said. I want to know everything. Mason went to work. He was expensive, $300 an hour, but within 3 days, his encrypted emails started arriving, and each one was a blow to the chest. The first email contained a credit report and a background check log. Subject inquiry. Origin. Haley Dawson. Take a look at the attachment. Your credit was pulled on December 10th, 2 weeks before Christmas. The inquiry did not come from a lender. It came from a private firm contracted by Dawson Freight and Supply. Specifically, the request originated from the IP address of Richard Dawson's home office. The query parameters were flagged for infidelity indicators, hidden assets, and Boston entanglements. I stared at the screen. Richard had been hunting for dirt on me before Caleb had even seen the clinic charges. He was looking for a reason. He was shopping for a crime to pin on me. The second email came the next day. Subject, Caleb's call logs. I traced the blocked number Caleb has been calling every Thursday. It is not a woman. It is a telehealth platform called Better Mind. He has been seeing a therapist, Haley, for 3 months. The timing of the calls lines up with his late meetings. My heart broke a little. Caleb was suffering. He was talking to a stranger about his feelings because he felt he couldn't talk to me. He was trying to get help. But then I realized the tragedy of it. He was seeking clarity. But at home, Richard was filling his head with static. But it was the third email that turned my sadness into cold, hard rage. It arrived on the morning of the 29th. The subject line was just audio file, the smoking gun. I opened it. There was a brief message from Mason. I have a contact who bartends at the Rusty Lantern in Willow Creek. He knows Richard. He knows Marcus Hollister. He saw them in a booth 3 nights before Christmas and turned on his voice memo app when he heard your name. The audio is a bit muddy, but listen to the 10-second mark. I put in my earbuds and pressed play. The background noise of clinking glasses and low chatter filled my ears. Then Richard's voice cut through, distinctive and booming. "She's smart, Marcus. That's the problem. If they just split up, she takes half the equity in the farmhouse, and she keeps her stake in the business. She bought those shares with her own money." "Not if we trigger the prenup," Marcus's voice replied, smooth and oily. "The infidelity clause is a total forfeiture of assets, but we need proof, real proof." "We have the clinic charges," Richard said. "Caleb is already spiraling. I showed him the bill. I told him, why would she go to a clinic in Boston if it was your baby?" He's ready to snap. "Once we prove she cheated, or at least make it look convincing enough that she settles to avoid a scandal, she walks away with nothing. Caleb gets the house, we keep the warehouse, and the Dawson name stays clean." "And Caleb?" Marcus asked. "He'll get over it," Richard said dismissively. "He needs to toughen up anyway. Getting rid of her is the best thing for him. She makes him feel small. I need him focused on the business, not chasing after her approval." I pulled the earbuds out, my hands trembling. It wasn't about the baby. It wasn't even really about the affair. It was a heist. Richard Dawson was willing to gaslight his own son, destroy his grandchild's family, and frame me for adultery, all to save a percentage of equity in a warehouse distribution company. He saw Caleb's insecurity not as a problem to be solved, but as a lever to be pulled. I saved the file to 3 different hard drives. I emailed it to my own secure cloud. Mason had asked if I wanted to clear my name or find the truth. I had found both. And as I looked at the file named Dawson Conspiracy Evidence.mp3, I knew that when I walked back into that farmhouse, I wasn't just going to be defending myself, I was going to be the prosecutor. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower took exactly 45 seconds, time enough for my ears to pop and my stomach to twist into a tighter knot. I was here to see Avery Quinn. If Marcus Hollister was a shark, Avery Quinn was the killer whale that ate sharks for sport. She did not advertise on billboards. She did not have a catchy slogan. She was the attorney you called when you wanted to burn the earth so thoroughly that nothing would ever grow on it again. Her office was a glass box suspended over the city, smelling of espresso and expensive leather. Avery herself was petite, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, with eyes that scanned documents like a laser reading a barcode. She did not offer me coffee. She did not offer me a tissue. She pointed to the chair opposite her desk and held out her hand for my file. I handed over the packet I had compiled, the medical records, the calendar logs, the notes from Mason, and most importantly, the prenuptial agreement I had signed 5 years ago. Avery opened the file. The room was silent for 10 minutes, save for the sound of pages turning and the occasional scratch of her fountain pen aggressively circling a paragraph. Finally, she looked up. "This prenuptial agreement is a weapon," she said. Her voice was low, devoid of sympathy, which I appreciated. I had enough sympathy. I needed a strategy. "Who drafted this?" "Marcus Hollister," I said, "my father-in-law's attorney." "Of course he did," Avery muttered. She spun the document around and tapped a section on page 12 with a manicured nail. Section 4, paragraph B, the infidelity fault clause. "Did you read this before you signed it?" I skimmed it, I admitted, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. I was 27. I was in love. I trusted them. Richard told me it was standard boilerplate to protect the family assets. It is not standard, Avery corrected me. It is predatory. Listen to this language. In the event that the dissolution of marriage is precipitated by a proven act of adultery by the non-moneyed spouse, said spouse shall forfeit all claims to alimony, all claims to equitable distribution of the marital residence. And here is the kicker. Any equity shares held in Dawson Freight and Supply shall revert to the primary shareholder at the original purchase price. She looked at me over her glasses. You own shares in the company, Haley? Yes, I said, 10%. I bought them with my own salary 3 years ago when the company needed liquidity for a fleet expansion. I put $50,000 of my own money into that business, and the company has grown since then. It has tripled in value. Exactly, Avery said, leaning back. If you divorce Caleb amicably, you keep those shares. They are worth, by my estimation, $150,000 today, plus future dividends. But if you cheated, if you are the villain, you lose the shares. And Richard buys them back for the original $50,000. He makes $100,000 profit just by ruining your reputation. He reclaims the voting bloc. I felt sick. I had thought Richard was just a controlling patriarch. I did not realize he was a corporate raider who viewed his son's marriage as a hostile takeover target. So what do we do? I asked. Do I file a response? Do I go to mediation? Avery laughed, a short, sharp sound. Mediation is for people who want to find a middle ground. These people tried to ambush you on Christmas Eve with a process server. They do not want a middle ground. They want your head on a spike. If we go to court, it will drag on for 18 months. Richard has deep pockets. He will bleed you dry in legal fees before you ever get to a judge. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the gray city. We are not going to play defense, Haley. We are going to play offense. If Caleb's accusations are false, and looking at this medical evidence, they are demonstrably false, then what he did is not just grounds for divorce. It is defamation per se. In this state, falsely accusing a woman of unchastity is one of the few categories of speech that is considered defamation per se. Avery explained, turning back to me. It means you do not even have to prove financial damages. The damage is assumed. And because he did it in front of third parties, his parents, and because he filed a legal document based on that lie, we have a case. But we can go further, she started pacing. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, civil conspiracy. If Richard knew the accusations were false, and that recording from the bar suggests he did, then he is not just a bystander, he is a co-conspirator. We can sue him personally. My instinct, the soft part of me that still remembered dancing with Caleb at our wedding, flinched. I don't want to destroy them, Avery. I just want to save my marriage, or at least I want to save the truth. Avery stopped pacing. She walked over to me and placed her hands on the desk, leaning down until she was eye level with me. Haley, she said softly, wake up. Your husband filed for divorce on the morning of Christ's birth. He told his family you were carrying a bastard. He is trying to steal your financial future. Are you trying to save your marriage, or are you trying to make sure you are not erased from your own life? I stared at her. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. If you walk into a mediation room, they will bury you in paperwork, Avery continued. They will count on you being too polite to fight back. They are banking on your silence, so we are going to do something they do not expect. We are not going to file a motion. We are going to file a reality check." She returned to her chair and pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Here is the strategy," she said. "You are not going to court. You are going to the next family gathering. I want you to walk into the lion's den. You want me to go back to the house. I want you to go back to the scene of the crime," Avery said. "But this time you are not coming with gifts. You are coming with witnesses. You are coming with the medical records. And you are coming with this." She tapped a folder on her desk. "I am going to draft a civil complaint. It will name Caleb Dawson, Richard Dawson, and Marcus Hollister as defendants in a lawsuit for defamation, conspiracy, and fraud. We will not file it yet. We will put it in a sealed envelope. You will place it on the coffee table and tell them they have two choices. They can recant everything, restore your reputation, and give you fair terms. Or you open that envelope, file the lawsuit, and drag the Dawson family name through the press for the next 2 years." "Blackmail?" I asked. "Leverage," she corrected. "It is only blackmail if the information is false. This is the truth, and the truth is the one thing Richard Dawson cannot afford." Avery then pulled up a property record on her computer screen. "There is one more thing you need to know, something that explains why Caleb is so terrified of his father." She turned the screen toward me. It was the deed to the farmhouse, the home Caleb and I had lived in for 5 years, the home I thought we owned. "Look at the date on the deed transfer," Avery said. 5 years ago, 2 weeks after you signed the prenup." I squinted at the document. It listed Caleb as the owner. "Look closer," she said. "It lists Caleb Dawson and Richard Dawson as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Caleb does not own that house, Haley. He co-owns it with his father. If Caleb defies Richard, Richard can force a partition sale. He can kick Caleb out of his own home." Leonard had made sure that Caleb's housing security was tied to his loyalty. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was a masterclass in control. Richard had structured Caleb's entire life so that rebellion was impossible. If Caleb stood up to him, he lost his job, he lost his house, and now Richard was trying to make sure that if Caleb stayed with me, he lost his pride. "He's trapped," I whispered. "He is," Avery agreed. "But that does not give him the right to destroy you to save himself." When you walk into that house with the truth, Haley, you are not just challenging your husband's story. You are threatening a system Richard has been building for 30 years. He will not go down quietly. "I don't expect him to," I said. "Good." Avery stood up and extended her hand. "I will have the draft complaint ready by Friday. You get your team together, Jenna, the investigator, the boss, and his wife. You go in there with a phalanx. Do not let them isolate you again." I shook her hand. Her grip was iron. "One last piece of advice," Avery said as I walked to the door. "When you look at Caleb, do not look for the man you married. Look at the opposing party, because until he signs that retraction, that is all he is." I walked out of the office carrying 2 heavy folders. The first was labeled Proof of Truth. It contained the ultrasound, the letter from Dr. Warren, the affidavit from Lauren, and the flight logs from Ethan. It was the shield. The second folder, the one Avery had just handed me, was labeled simply Nuclear Options. It contained the draft lawsuit that detailed Richard's conspiracy, the transcript of the bar recording, and the threat to expose their financial maneuvers to the shareholders of Dawson Freight and Supply. It was the sword. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the car began its smooth, rapid descent, I watched the numbers count down. 40, 39, 38. A week ago, I had been crying in a motel room, shaking at the thought of losing my family. I had been a structural engineer, analyzing the collapse of my own life, looking for a way to patch the cracks. But as the elevator hit the 20th floor, I felt something inside me shift. The grief, which had been a heavy, suffocating blanket, began to compress. It hardened. It crystallized into something sharp and cold. I was done crying. I was done wondering what I had done wrong. They had tried to erase me. They had tried to edit me out of the family narrative like a mistake. They thought they could crush me with a prenup and a lie because they assumed I would play by the rules of a heartbroken wife. The elevator doors chimed softly as they opened onto the marble lobby. I stepped out, my heels clicking rhythmically on the stone floor. I clutched the folders to my chest, not like a shield, but like a weapon. I am not going to save the marriage, I thought, walking out into the winter sunlight. I am going to save myself. And if the Dawson dynasty had to burn to the ground to keep me warm, then I would be the one to strike the match. The knowledge that Caleb was in therapy sat in my stomach like a stone I had swallowed but could not digest. When Mason told me about the blocked number, the weekly 45-minute calls to a crisis counselor, the anger that had been fueling me for days flickered. It did not go out, but it changed color. It shifted from the bright, hot red of righteous indignation to a bruised, aching purple. If Caleb was just a villain, a jealous monster acting out of spite, I could destroy him without blinking. But a villain who was secretly paying a stranger to help him stop crying? That was harder to hate. It complicated the geometry of my rage. I needed to see him, not in the flesh. I was not ready for that. But I needed to see the space he was inhabiting. I needed to understand how we had gone from a team to adversaries in the span of 6 weeks. I waited until 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, when I knew Caleb would be at the distribution center and Richard would be holding court at the main office. I drove to the small starter house on the edge of town. We still co-owned it, though we had been staying at the farmhouse more often to help his parents. This little bungalow, with its peeling blue paint and the porch swing we had installed on our first anniversary, was supposed to be our escape pod. Now it felt like a tomb. I keyed into the front door. The air inside was stale, suspending dust motes in the shafts of winter sunlight that cut through the blinds. It was quiet, not the peaceful quiet of a resting home, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a place where people had stopped speaking the truth to each other. Walked through the living room, stepping over a pile of unopened mail on the rug. I saw my own handwriting on a sticky note on the fridge. Buy more coffee. It felt like an artifact from a lost civilization. I went into the bedroom. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled in a way that suggested restless, thrashing sleep. On Caleb's nightstand, next to a bottle of melatonin and a half-empty glass of water, lay his journal, a bound leather notebook I had bought him 3 years ago. He used to write lists or project ideas in it. I knew it was private. In any other lifetime, I would never have touched it. But the man who owned this journal had just tried to serve me with divorce papers in front of his mother. So the Geneva Convention of Marriage no longer applied. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the cover. The early entries were mundane: work stress, notes on lumber prices, reminders to call his mom. But as I flipped toward the autumn months, the handwriting changed. It became jagged, pressed hard into the paper. The loops of the letters sharp and angry. I stopped at an entry dated mid-September. September 14th, he wrote, Sunday. We went to Nathan and Emily's for the barbecue. I knew it was coming. I could feel it as soon as Emily refused the wine. Pregnant? Of course they are. Nathan has been married for 5 minutes, and he hits the bull's eye. I smiled. I hugged him. I think I pulled a muscle in my face, trying to look happy. Dad cornered me by the grill later. He asked if Haley and I were ever going to get serious about the family line. $250 Boston. She's not sick. She would have told me if she was sick. She tells me everything, or she used to. If she was pregnant with my child, she would be screaming it from the rooftops. We've been trying for 2 years. She knows how much I want this. So if she's going to a clinic and not telling me, there is only one reason. It's not mine. I looked up the clinic. They do everything. Prenatal, STI testing, termination. My head is spinning. I picture her in that city with those architects feeling important, feeling seen. I look at myself in the mirror and I see a guy who manages a warehouse in Pennsylvania. Why would she stay? I knew she would wake up one day and realize I'm not enough. I just didn't think it would happen this fast. I covered my mouth with my hand. The tragic irony was suffocating. I had hidden the appointments to protect the surprise, to make the moment perfect. He had taken that silence and filled it with his deepest insecurities. He had written a story where he was the victim because he could not imagine a world where he was the father. I turned the page to November. The entries were becoming erratic, written at odd hours, 3 a.m., midnight. November 12th. Spoke to the counselor on the app again. Dr. S says I'm projecting. He says I need to talk to Haley, but I can't. If I ask her and she lies, I'll die. If I ask her and she tells the truth, I'll die. It's easier to be angry than to be this scared. I keep having this nightmare where she leaves me for someone more successful, more stable, more like what Dad wanted for her. Richard always told me I was lucky to land her. He said, "She's out of your league, son. Better keep her on a short leash or she'll bolt." I think she bolted. I think she's gone, and her body just hasn't left the house yet. My heart ached for him, for the scared little boy living inside my husband's 6-foot frame, terrified that he was unlovable. But then I turned to the final marked page, dated 2 weeks before Christmas, and the ache hardened back into ice. December 10th. Dad called me into his office. He closed the blinds. He looked serious. He said, "I did some digging, Caleb, because I love you, and because you're too soft to look for the truth yourself." He slid a folder across the desk, screenshots, her credit card statement, the clinic charges circled in red marker. He had a report from a private investigator about Ethan Whitaker. No proof of them together, but Dad said, "You don't need a smoking gun when you have smoke this thick." He told me about the prenup clause. He said, "If you wait, she leaves you and takes half the business. She takes the house. She laughs at you with her new man. If you strike first, you keep your dignity. You keep the assets. You need to protect yourself, Caleb, before she ruins you. Be a man for once." I nearly threw up, but he's right. She's playing me. I have to stop being a fool. I stared at the words. Be a man for once. Richard hadn't just uncovered the evidence. He had curated it. He had taken a frightened, depressed man and manipulated his worst fears to engineer a financial coup. He knew Caleb was unstable. He knew Caleb was seeing a therapist. And instead of suggesting marriage counseling, Richard had handed him a loaded gun and pointed it at my head. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. I was not shaking, I was working. I took a high-resolution photo of the September entry. Click. I took a photo of the October spiraling. Click. I took a photo of the December entry where Richard explicitly instructed him to use the prenup to protect the assets. Click. These were not just diary entries anymore. They were proof of undue influence. They were proof that my husband was not acting of his own free will, but was a puppet dancing on strings held by a bitter old man who loved his money more than his son. I closed the journal and placed it back on the nightstand exactly as I had found it. I stood up and walked to the closet. I grabbed a few sweaters, a pair of jeans, and my winter scarf, shoving them into a tote bag. It was a perfunctory gesture. I hadn't really come for the clothes. As I walked back through the silent house, the ghost of the man I married seemed to watch me from the corners. I felt a wave of grief so profound it almost knocked me over. I realized I was mourning two men, the husband who had been too weak to trust me, who had let his insecurity rot our foundation until it collapsed, and the man he could have been if he hadn't been raised by a father who viewed love as a weakness and control as the only currency that mattered. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me. The click of the deadbolt sounded final. I walked to my car, clutching my phone in my pocket. I had come looking for clothes, but I was leaving with something far more dangerous. I was holding the anatomy of the betrayal. I had the medical evidence to destroy their lie. Now I had the psychological evidence to destroy their justification. I sat in the driver's seat and looked back at the house one last time. "You poor broken things," I whispered, thinking of Caleb and Richard. One man weaponized fear to control his kingdom. The other man weaponized fear to blow up his own sanctuary. And in the middle of their wreckage, they had made the fatal mistake of thinking I would burn with them. I put the car in gear. I was done visiting the museum of my past. It was time to drive toward the future. I had a lawsuit in the passenger seat that was going to clear the road. The silence had lasted exactly 21 days. For 3 weeks, I had not spoken a word to my husband. I had not answered the barrage of texts from my mother-in-law, Ellen, which ranged from hysterical apologies to passive-aggressive reminders that marriage requires forgiveness. I had let the silence stretch until it became a physical thing. A taut wire pulled across the distance between Boston and Willow Creek. But silence eventually has to break. I just wanted to make sure that when it did, I controlled the noise. I called Ellen on a Tuesday morning. I knew Richard would be at the warehouse and Caleb would be at the site, leaving her alone in that big cinnamon-scented house to stew in her own guilt. "Haley." Her voice was breathless when she picked up, as if she had been staring at the phone, willing it to ring. "Oh, thank God. Haley, honey, where are you? We've been so worried." "I'm safe, Ellen," I said. My voice was calm, the voice I used when explaining to a contractor that a load-bearing wall was failing, detached, factual. "I'm calling because I think it's time we talked." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, of course. We want that too. Caleb is a mess, Haley. He won't eat. He just wants to fix this." "I'm sure he does," I said, staring at the stack of manila folders on the desk of my temporary apartment. I want to call a family meeting this Saturday at 2 p.m. at the farmhouse. Of course, Ellen said, and I could hear the relief washing over her. She thought I was going to surrender. She thought I was coming to beg for my place back at the table. I'll make a roast. I'll tell everyone. Everyone, I repeated. I want Richard there. I want Caleb. I want Nathan and Emily. And I want Marcus Hollister. Ellen paused. Marcus, the attorney? Since he seems to have so many opinions about my marriage, I think he should be there to hear what I have to say, I said. You all heard one version of what is happening on Christmas Eve. It's time you heard mine. Okay, Ellen said, her voice gaining a nervous edge. Okay, I'll arrange it. We just want you home, Haley. I'll see you Saturday, I said, and hung up before she could say she loved me. I did not want to hear it. Love does not watch silently while your life is dismantled. Saturday morning dawned gray and flat. The sky over the Midwest was a sheet of unpolished steel, threatening snow but never quite delivering it. I packed my car with the precision of a soldier preparing for deployment. On the passenger seat, I placed the 2 folders Avery Quinn had prepared. The first, labeled Proof of Truth, was thick with medical records, affidavits, and travel logs. The second, labeled Nuclear Options, was thinner but infinitely heavier. Next to the folders, I placed a small navy blue velvet box, the same box I had carried in my pocket on Christmas Eve. Inside were the 3 pregnancy tests, the ink on the little windows, now dry and faded, but still undeniably pink. It was supposed to be the happiest gift of Caleb's life. Now it was evidence. I did not drive alone, though I would walk through the door alone. 3 cars followed me out of the city limits. In the first car was Avery Quinn, dressed in a suit sharp enough to cut glass, looking like a predator anticipating a meal. In the second car was Mason Kerr, my private investigator, with his laptop and his recordings. In the third car was Jenna, my best friend, who had traded her hospital scrubs for a black blazer and a look of pure vengeance. We had a plan. They would park down the street just out of sight of the farmhouse windows. I would go in alone. I would present my case. If the Dawson family accepted the truth and agreed to my terms, I would walk out. If they fought, if Richard tried to bully me, or if Marcus tried to twist the law, I would send a single text message, green light. At that signal, Avery and Mason would walk through the front door and turn a family dispute into a legal raid. And digitally, I had my air support. Ethan and Lauren were on standby, sitting in their living room in Boston with a laptop open, ready to accept a video call and testify to my whereabouts with the righteous fury of people whose own honor had been impugned. The drive to Willow Creek took 5 hours. I spent the first 2 hours in silence, listening to the hum of the tires on the asphalt. I spent the next 2 hours rehearsing my opening lines out loud over and over, trying to scrub the tremor from my voice. I am not here to argue, I said to the yours empty car. I am here to correct the record. No, that sounded too robotic. You called my child a mistake. I tried again, my voice catching on the word child. You tried to steal my future. Better, harder. 10 miles outside of town, I pulled into a gas station. My hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from a surplus of adrenaline that had nowhere to go. I needed to ground myself. I needed to remember why I was doing this. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. I flipped it to selfie mode and pressed record. I looked at myself on the screen. I looked tired. my skin pale, shadows under my eyes. That makeup could not quite hide, but my eyes were clear. "Haley," I said to the camera, "if you get in there and you start to feel soft, if you look at Caleb and remember how he used to look at you, stop. If you start to think maybe you should just let it go to keep the peace, remember." I took a breath, watching the condensation cloud the air in the cold car. "Remember how it felt to stand in that hallway," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Remember flattening yourself against the wall. Remember hearing the man who vowed to protect you tell his parents that your baby, our baby, was a mistake. Remember the sound of his disgust. He did not give you the benefit of the doubt. He gave you a process server. Do not back down." I ended the recording. I saved it. I tucked the phone into the deep pocket of my wool coat, right next to my heart. I pulled back onto the road. The familiar landmarks of Willow Creek began to appear. The old grain silo, the high school football field, the turnoff for the eccentric antique shop Ellen loved. It was a landscape of memory, but it felt foreign now, like a movie set I had once visited but no longer belonged to. I turned onto the long winding driveway of the Dawson estate. The snow from Christmas had mostly melted, leaving behind slush and brown mud that splattered against the wheel wells. When the farmhouse came into view, my stomach gave a hard, violent twist. The driveway was full. Richard's massive pickup truck was parked near the garage, taking up 2 spaces as usual. Caleb's sedan was next to it. Nathan and Emily's SUV was parked behind them, the baby on board sticker in the window, mocking me with its cheerfulness. And there was a black luxury sedan I recognized as Marcus Hollister's. They were all there, the whole jury. I parked my car at the bottom of the drive, ensuring I wasn't blocked in. I checked the rearview mirror. The street was empty. My team was in position, waiting for the signal. I turned off the ignition. The silence rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. I reached over to the passenger seat. I picked up the folder labeled Proof of Truth. I picked up the folder labeled Nuclear Options. And then I picked up the navy velvet box. I stepped out of the car. The air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke, the same scent that had greeted me on Christmas Eve. It was a sensory trigger that almost made my knees buckle. For a split second, I was back there, holding gifts, thinking I was walking into a celebration. No, I told myself, standing up straighter. That woman is gone. She died in the hallway. I walked up the path to the front porch. I could hear sounds coming from inside, the muffled hum of voices, the rise and fall of a commentator on television, a football game. It was eerily, terrifyingly similar to that night. They were inside drinking beer, watching the game, talking about me. Maybe Richard was making another joke about his legacy. Maybe Caleb was sitting there in silence, letting his father rewrite his reality. I stepped onto the porch. My boots made a hollow sound on the wooden planks. I stood before the heavy oak door. I raised my hand to knock, but then I stopped. My hand hovered over the brass knob. This was it, the moment of no return. Once I turned this knob, I wasn't just walking into a house. I was walking into a war. I was about to shatter the illusion of the perfect Dawson family. I was about to break my husband's heart with the truth, and then break his father's power with the law. I closed my eyes for 1 second. I pictured the ultrasound image tucked inside the folder, a tiny grayscale bean. My witness. For you, I thought. I did not knock. I reached out and grasped the cold metal of the doorknob, but before I could turn it, the door was yanked open from the inside. Ellen stood there wearing an apron, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her eyes went wide when she saw me. She looked older than she had 3 weeks ago, her face drawn, her smile lines deepening into grooves of anxiety. "Haley," she breathed, "you're here." Behind her, the warmth of the house spilled out, carrying the sound of the television. And then, cutting through the noise, came Richard's voice from the living room. "Good," he boomed, sounding impatient, authoritative, and completely unaware that he was about to lose everything. "Let's finally get this over with." I looked at Ellen. I did not smile. I gripped my folders tighter, stepped past her over the threshold, and walked into the lion's den. The living room of the Dawson farmhouse was exactly as I remembered it from Christmas Eve, down to the way the furniture was arranged to face the television like an altar. But today, the television was muted. The football game flickered silently on the screen, a ghost of normalcy in a room that was about to become a crime scene. Richard sat in his oversized leather recliner, a beer in his hand, looking like a king holding court. Marcus Hollister sat on the adjacent sofa, his briefcase resting by his feet like a loyal dog. Nathan and Emily were huddled together on the love seat looking anxious, while Caleb stood by the fireplace, his arm resting on the mantelpiece, staring into the dead ash. When I walked in, the air left the room. I did not say hello. I did not take off my coat. I walked straight to the center of the Persian rug, the exact spot where Caleb had intended for the process server to hand me the papers 3 weeks ago. I planted my feet. I made eye contact with each of them, letting the silence stretch until Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "You're probably wondering why I called you here," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried to the corners of the room. "We assumed you finally came to your senses," Richard said, taking a sip of his beer. "Have you brought a counteroffer? Because Marcus has the original filing ready to go." "I brought a counter-narrative," I corrected him. I placed the 2 manila folders on the heavy oak coffee table. Then I placed the small navy blue velvet gift box right on top of them. Caleb's eyes flicked to the box. I saw a flicker of recognition. It was the box he thought contained a watch or cufflinks. "On Christmas Eve," I said, keeping my eyes locked on Caleb. "I arrived here 40 minutes early. The front door was unlocked. I walked in. I stood in the hallway right outside that archway." I pointed to the spot. Caleb went pale. "I heard you tell your parents that I was pregnant," I continued. "I heard you call it a mistake. I heard you say it wasn't yours. And I heard you, Richard, tell him to serve me with papers in front of everyone so I couldn't spin the story." "You were eavesdropping," Richard scoffed, leaning forward. "That isn't exactly noble, Haley, lurking in hallways." "No one forced you to talk about me like I was a defendant you were trying to convict," I shot back, my voice cutting through his bluster like a knife. "You thought you were writing the ending to my marriage. You were wrong." I reached down and flipped open the lid of the navy box. There were no diamonds inside. There were 3 white plastic sticks, the windows displaying the faint, dried pink lines of positive results. "This was your Christmas present, Caleb," I said. "I didn't tell you over the phone because I wanted to see your face when I told you we had finally beaten the odds. I wanted to give you a miracle. You gave me a process server." Caleb stared at the tests, His hand twitched at his side. "It's a nice prop," Richard sneered. "But biology doesn't lie, Haley. You were in Boston. Caleb was here. Unless you've figured out an immaculate conception, that baby belongs to your boss." "I'm glad you brought up biology," I said. I opened the folder labeled Proof of Truth. I pulled out the letter from Dr. Leah Warren, printed on heavy medical letterhead, and the glossy black and white ultrasound image. "This is a signed affidavit from my obstetrician," I said, sliding it across the table toward Caleb. "It details the crown rump length of the fetus and the gestational age based on the measurements taken 3 weeks ago. The date of conception is narrowed down to a 72-hour window." Caleb picked up the paper. His hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. "Read the dates, Caleb," I commanded. "September 22nd through September 24th, he whispered. "Where were we on September 23rd? I asked. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and glassy. "The cabin, Pocono Mountains, for our anniversary." "Exactly," I said. "We didn't leave that cabin for 2 days. We were together, intimately, exclusively." I looked around the room. "This baby is 100% yours, Caleb. It is the child you prayed for. It is the child you cried over when the treatments failed. And you just spent the last month telling your lawyer it was a bastard." I heard a small, strangled sound from the love seat. I looked over to see Emily pressing her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Nathan looked sick. They had envied us this miracle, and now they were watching us destroy it. "That's just an estimate," Richard sputtered, though his face had lost some of its ruddy color. "Doctors make mistakes. You were in Boston for weeks. You were spending late nights with Whitaker. We have the credit card statements. We have the charges." "Ah, yes, the smoking gun," I said. I pulled out the next sheet from the folder, a spreadsheet I had compiled, cross-referencing every single charge Richard had flagged with my work calendar and Ethan's calendar. "Here's the charge to Harbor Women's Health," I said, pointing to the red-circled code Z32.01, pregnancy confirmation. "I used our joint card, the one that sends a text alert to your phone every time I swipe it. If I were sneaking around to hide a shameful secret, do you really think I would have put it on a shared ledger?" I tossed the paper down. "And here is the timeline of my late nights with Ethan." I pulled out my phone. "But why don't we let Ethan